There's a lot of concern amongst independent Baptist pastors about the number of our churches that are closing their doors today. And that's not a fairy tale, that's a sad fact of reality. As I see it here in the Midwest, and I'm sure it's the same all across the nation, there are two scenarios where churches close their doors. A man has taken an existing church that had numerous problems. It's taken him time to resolve those issues, correct things, basically start afresh, reach people, reteach the folks that have been there for a while, and really try to get the thing to have some momentum and become self-supporting and growing again. Another problem is a man goes to start a church and he has initially some support that helps him begin the project. After opening day and some months later, churches drop their support in order to put it somewhere else, and that's okay. But sometimes that pastor that just started a church is left with a struggling church just getting off the ground. He needs some financial assistance. If some help is not available to both these type scenarios, then we have churches closing their doors. I believe there is a way we can address that problem, find a solution to the problem that exists. That's where Scott and Debbie Netterville and Ambassador Baptist Ministries come into the picture. For instance, Brother Jason Minkowski and his wife Kelly and their children were on staff here at our church for 6 years. Brother Jason worked as our youth director, financial officer, many other areas of our church program, did a great job. God laid it on his heart to start a church in Quincy, a very needy city down on the Mississippi River in central Illinois. We were able, through our Reseeding Illinois program, to provide manpower, materials, and money to help Brother Jason start Grace Baptist Church. Other pastors and churches and people here in the state of Illinois got behind the project, and truthfully, they had a great start date 2.5 years ago to that church. And then as time went on, some of the churches, as I mentioned earlier, had to drop their support. And Jason knew that was going to happen. He was still working with a young congregation, many of them first-generation Christians, still learning about tithing and giving and being involved and committed to what's necessary to make a New Testament church grow. And he really got to the place where he needed some help. We were able to make it possible for Scott and Debbie to go down to Quincy at no cost to Grace Baptist Church. There were no motel expenses. There were no travel expenses. They were able to go down and just throw themselves into the work of the ministry there for, I believe it was about 2 weeks. There were several positive results from the Nettervilles being at Grace Baptist. First of all, the Minkowskis personally profited from having the opportunity to fellowship with mature, dedicated Christians. Iron sharpeneth iron. And as a result of the Nettervilles being there, Brother Minkowski and his wife were personally encouraged. The church members at Grace Baptist Church were encouraged as well. Many of them, as I mentioned, were first generation Christians. And so the Nettervilles were able to have a meal with them and say the same things in private conversation that they've heard their pastor preach from the pulpit. So it reinforced their pastor's position and stand on issues and doctrines as far as New Testament church Christianity is concerned. And the third result was that the church corporately profited. They had their second biggest day they've ever had. They had 18 first-time visitors in the short time that the Nettervilles were there. And of course, people were saved. And the residual effects from their being at the church have continued as people who were reached during that time period are still attending and growing at Grace Baptist.
You know, the Lord's allowed my wife, Debbie, and I to be able to serve Him for over the last 25 plus years. He's allowed us to work on staff for several different pastors, and over the last decade to pastor a church in the Houston area. We'd like to be able to be a help in at least two areas. First, in that of helping to plant new churches. Listen, we've got to have churches that are able to preach the Word of God, to win souls, and to be able to, Pastor, be able to help have revival here in America. Our part would be to come in alongside the new pastor and just be a servant to him as he gets started by winning souls, helping to clean a building or get it prepared, or whatever it is that the pastor needs. And then secondly, Pastor, to help small churches. A lot of times the pastor doesn't have the resources that he needs. He's become discouraged, and God's given us the ability and equipped us to know the needs of a small church, to be able to come in and to be an encouragement to them. The Lord's allowed us to see the burden of small churches. I've been there. Could have benefited greatly by just someone coming in to be an encouragement to us, to help us go out and win souls, to just come over and spend some time in fellowship and maybe spend some time in prayer. And the Lord's allowed my wife and I to have the opportunity to do that, even since He's called us to this ministry. We know that many times that if they just had somebody or just a little push, that they could continue on faithful.
Scott and Debbie have a burden to help churches like Grace Baptist all over the nation, especially here in the Midwest. I would think that we as independent Baptists would want to be a part of the solution. We are sometimes quick to talk about the problem and slow to get involved in the solution. So I want to encourage you to consider prayerfully supporting the Ambassador Baptist Ministries and the Netterville family. You know, most of us, all of us, would like to put as much money as possible into our home base, and I believe that's necessary. But remember this, God always blesses when we help others. Let's not just talk about the problem. Let's be a part of the solution.